All right, Job chapter 20, let's call this one Chipping Away in Their Feelings, Getting Even, because that is exactly what Zophar is going to be preoccupied with when he has an opportunity to take the conversation in a different direction. Instead, much like we saw in his first speech, he's going to be pretty redundant. Even though he's going to be more original than he was before, he is going to follow in the pattern of offering a treatise on the wicked that actually just looks like another ad hominem attack on Job personally. How do we know? Well, instead of alluding to the fact that he might have been insulted, as we saw in Eliphaz and Bildad's introductions, his introduction is literally going to say in verse 3, I hear censure that insults me. And based upon that insult, he is going to overlook the fact that Job's last two statements or extended defenses have basically shown signs that Job has begun to hope again. But he's so insulted and in his feelings that he redirects the conversation back to conflict instead of taking a potential route towards de-escalating the tension between Job and his three friends. As he begins to give his own treatise on the wicked that really looks more like another personal attack on Job, beginning around verse 4, where it says, do you not know this from old, since man was placed on the earth, that the exulting of the wicked is short, and the joy of the godless is but for a moment. That's about as general as it's going to get, even though he's going to carry on in generalities for a few more verses. He's going to seem to really be creating this great theory of the wicked based upon things he's simply looking at in Job's suffering, around verse 9, where it says, the eye that saw him will see him no more. Job is clearly passing away, at least in his honor among his friends. As he said, he's got to beg for his servants to even come now. More importantly, in verse 10, he's going to say, and his hands will give back his wealth, understanding that Job was noted as not only being a wealthy man, but the greatest man of the East. And now that they are seeing him wither, it's kind of easy to point that kind of criticism at him, even though, once again, it's masked as a general theory on what happens to the wicked. Going on to verse 12, though evil is sweet in his mouth, though he hides it under his tongue, though he is loath to let it go and holds it in his mouth, yet his food is turned in his stomach. That's a 2-for-1, understanding that they are convinced that Job is stubborn and won't let go of this insistence that he is suffering as an innocent or blameless man. Then he's going to say the consequence of that is that his food is turned in his stomach, understanding that he's already said he's lost his appetite, and it's hard for him to even eat or hold down food under this circumstance. Verse 15 goes on, though, he swallows down riches and vomits them up, repeating that whole concept of you were rich, Job, but not so much anymore. Seems like, as I'm paraphrasing both the tone and the language, that they're actually starting to take a little bit of comfort in Job's misery. But he goes on in verse 18 to say, he will give back the fruit of his toil, once again, talking about the way in which Job has fallen from wealth to what seems like maybe poverty now. But beyond that, he's going to go on to say that this is a consequence in verses 19 through roughly 21 of the way in which Job has mistreated those who were unfortunate. Before he goes on to conclude in verse 22, the hand of everyone in misery will come against him, referring again to part of the way that Job lost his property was the fact that he was raided by different bands of raiders. It's also going to have a duplicate meaning that whether or not Zophar understands it might actually describe the way in which his three friends are miserable and as a result are now taking this as an opportunity to raise their hands against Job as well. But in verse 24, he's going to go on to say he will flee from an iron weapon and a bronze arrow will strike him through, potentially making a cheap paraphrase of something Job has already said, and that is the things that I fear and dread are coming upon me, and that no matter what he does, whether he's silent or he speaks, whether he tries to sleep or he's awake, he's suffering no matter what happens. And so they're not saying anything new. They're not making any great observations about the wicked. As a matter of fact, the things that they're saying are so narrowly tailored to Job that they are missing a lot of the things that the legitimate wise men of Israel have observed about the wicked and how difficult it can be to understand how God responds to them in his timing. But in addition to proving how little he knows about the wicked, he may also be proving how little he knows about wisdom in general, when Proverbs 12:16 reminds us that a fool's anger is known at once, but a prudent person conceals dishonor, understanding that at the very beginning of Zophar's response, he had two roads he could have taken. He could have picked up on the fact that Job had begun to hope again in his last two responses and taken the conversation that way. Or he could have fixated on the fact that he felt insulted by Job and retaliated against him in kind. He chose to retaliate, and the irony is this. When Bildad insulted Job's kids, Job overlooked the insult to focus on the truth in what Bildad said. Zophar, on the other hand, hasn't lost no property, no kids, and he's not laid up in bed sick, but he still cannot overlook the insult the way that Job can, which even more ironically is proving that as much as Zophar, Bildad, and Eliphaz are trying to prove how unwise Job is, the more they argue, the more they are actually proving how much wiser he is than them. In this situation, in spite of all his misfortune, being able to overlook an insult in a situation where his more privileged friends simply couldn't let it